Now, as I mentioned at the top of the program, inflation has accelerated to its fastest pace in over 2 decades, lifting to a whopping 5.1% over the past year. Predictably, Labor has used today's figure to attack the government's record on the economy, and they've announced a tax grab on multinationals, something the government's been pursuing anyway. But have a listen to this pathetic dig from Labor's would-be Assistant Treasurer.
And when Scott Morrison thinks about the Cayman Islands, he probably thinks it's a nice place to go for a holiday next time a natural disaster strikes Australia.
What a pathetic aside. That's the sort of stuff that you usually get on Twitter. That's from a bloke who's supposed to be an economics professor, of course has never run anything, let alone a $1.5 trillion economy. That job belongs to Josh Frydenberg.
This is not a time to put at risk the gains that we have made. We have come too far. This is a time for strength and stability. This is not a time to roll the dice on fake independence, a weak Labor leader, and the chaos of a hung parliament.
Earlier, I spoke with Simon Cowan from the Centre for Independent Studies. I started by asking whether the inflation rise was inevitable given the unprecedented level of government stimulus pumped into the economy over the past 12 months.
Well, absolutely. There's three different things that can point to a number similar to what we've seen today, and you know, 5.1% I think is above what most people were predicting. Certainly 3.7 at that underlying or trim mean level is well above the 2 to 3% band that we're looking at. But we've got a confluence of a number of different factors here. We've seen significant supply chain disruptions from the pandemic. We've seen an enormous increase in government spending over the last 18 months. And many of our largest trading partners, you know, in the US, the UK and elsewhere, are seeing inflation of 6, 7 and 8%. But with all of those numbers out there, the idea that Australia was going to be a massive outlier on inflation in retrospect seems far less likely than we predicted.
And those international factors are playing directly into our domestic economy, aren't they, especially through fuel prices?
Yeah, and one of the biggest increases that we've seen, I mean, it's interesting if you look at some of the big areas, we've seen an increase in, you know, residential housing, increase in rents, we've seen an increase in fuel prices. Food has also gone up significantly in some areas. Not only are these the sort of factors that are very visible to people, they're also the sort of things that hit people every day or every week. And so the impact of that inflation is going to be far greater politically and also, you know, at the hip pocket for voters than you would expect if it was being driven in other areas. So it's not just that we're seeing that increase in things like petrol, it's that we're seeing that increase during an election campaign to the things that people have to do every day or every week.
Well, talking about the political impact in the middle of an election campaign, it's the obvious point that really is indisputable, isn't it, that if the government had done what Labor had suggested, this would be higher, that inflation would be higher, because they were suggesting $6 billion was going to be spent as an incentive for people to get vaccinated, even if they'd already had their shots. Also, they suggested that JobKeeper should have been kept going for much longer than it was, so they would have had even more stimulus in the economy.
Well, we clearly overestimated the impact of COVID on the economy. Now, a lot of that, I think, was good faith estimations based on the expected infection rates. Australia did a lot better managing the pandemic than expected. But we did see an enormous increase in government spending, and it seemed for a while like the two major parties were competing with each other to see who could promise to spend more. We're in a situation now where we've seen a significant increase in the budget bottom line, not as a result of the government tightening the purse strings, but as a result of the economy improving and things like this inflation figure that make government revenue increase despite government not doing anything. I think what we could have seen in the March budget, for example, was something that indicated the government was aware that this was a problem, that they were going to start trimming that spending and trying to get the budget back to balance. But we haven't seen anything in this campaign from either major party that indicates they believe that getting the budget back to balance, getting this stimulus and spending under control is a priority at all.